You think water is wet, don't you? Of course it is. That's what water does. It makes things wet. Dive into a pool, you get wet. Step in a puddle, your shoes get wet. Touch water with your finger gets wet. Water equals wet. Simple. But here's a question that's going to mess with your head. What does wet actually mean? Can you define it without using the word wet? Try it. Go ahead. What is wetness? Most people say something like it's when water gets on something, or it's the feeling of moisture. But that just pushes the problem back. What is moisture? What's actually happening when something gets wet? And here's the really disturbing question. If water makes things wet, then what makes water wet? Is water wet to itself? You've been feeling wetness your entire life, but you've never actually felt water, not once. What you call wet isn't water at all. It's something far stranger, something that reveals a fundamental truth about how your senses work and how little you understand about the reality you think you know. If you're exploring how reality differs from our everyday assumptions, and you should be, because those differences reveal the hidden machinery of existence, consider subscribing to Reimagine the Physics. We dive deep into the counterintuitive truths about the physical world, examining how our senses construct reality rather than simply detecting it. Hit that notification bell and share this with someone who thinks they understand wetness. They don't. None of us do until we see what's actually happening. Let me show you what's really happening when you think something is getting wet. Here's an experiment. Fill a bathtub with water. Nice and warm. Now slowly lower yourself into it. Feel that wetness spreading across your skin as you sink deeper? Of course you do. That's water making you wet, right? Wrong. Now try this. Put on scuba gear and dive to the bottom of a swimming pool. Stay underwater for a few minutes. Move around. Touch things. Feel the water all around you. Notice something? You don't feel wet. Not at all. You're completely surrounded by water. More water than you've ever been exposed to, but there's no sensation of wetness. Your skin doesn't feel wet. The objects you touch underwater don't feel wet. You're immersed in liquid, but you feel nothing like what you call wet. This should break your understanding of wetness immediately. If water makes things wet, why don't you feel wet when you're completely surrounded by water? The answer is going to change everything you think you know about your senses. Wetness is not a property of water. Wetness is not something water does to objects. Wetness is a sensation created by your nervous system when a very specific set of conditions are met. And those conditions have almost nothing to do with water itself. Here's what's really happening when you feel wet. When water touches your skin and air, something starts happening immediately. The water begins to evaporate. As it evaporates, it pulls heat energy from your skin. Your skin gets colder. But it's not just temperature. The evaporation creates tiny air currents, microscopic movements across your skin surface. Your skin has temperature sensors and pressure sensors scattered all across it. These sensors are constantly monitoring for changes. When water evaporates from your skin, it triggers multiple sensor types simultaneously. Temperature sensors detect cooling, pressure sensors detect the micro movements of evaporation, and tactile sensors register the changing surface conditions as the water spreads and contracts. Your brain receives all these signals, cooling, micropressure changes, surface texture variations, and interprets them as a single unified sensation that you call wetness. But wetness doesn't exist out there in the world. It exists only in your nervous system's interpretation of multiple simultaneous stimuli. This is why you don't feel wet underwater. When you're completely submerged, water can't evaporate. There's no evaporation cooling. There are no micro air currents. Your temperature sensors register the water temperature, but they don't register the cooling effect of evaporation because there is no evaporation. Your pressure sensors detect the water pressure, but it's uniform pressure from all directions, not the changing directional pressure of evaporating liquid. Without evaporation, the specific combination of signals that your brain interprets as wetness never occurs. You're surrounded by water, but you don't feel wet. Let me make this even more concrete. Have you ever noticed that you feel more wet getting out of a pool than getting into it? That's not your imagination. When you first enter water, evaporation hasn't started yet. You feel the temperature change, you feel the pressure of the water, but the wetness sensation takes a moment to develop. It's only when you emerge and evaporation begins in earnest that you feel maximally wet. Or think about this. Why does a towel work? You think it's because the towel absorbs the water, removing it from your skin. But that's only part of the story. The towel also stops evaporation by removing the water before it can evaporate. When you towel off, you're not just removing water, you're preventing the evaporation cooling that creates the sensation of wetness. Here's another way to see this. Take a hair dryer to your wet skin. The warm air makes you feel dry very quickly, but not because it's removing more water than toweling would. It's because the heat counteracts the evaporation cooling. Your skin is still covered with water, but you don't feel wet because your temperature sensors aren't detecting the cooling effect. This revelation goes deeper than just wetness. It shows you something fundamental about how your senses work. You think your senses detect properties of the world: hot, cold, rough, smooth, wet, dry. But that's not what's happening. Your senses detect changes, differences, patterns of stimulation. Your brain then interprets these patterns and constructs sensations that feel like they're properties of objects. But the sensations exist in your brain, not in the objects. Consider color. You see a red apple. You think redness is a property of the apple, something the apple has. But redness doesn't exist in the apple. The apple reflects light of certain wavelengths. Your eyes detect those wavelengths. Your brain interprets that wavelength information and constructs the sensation of redness. The apple isn't red. Your brain is creating redness as a response to certain wavelengths of reflected light. Sound works the same way. That music isn't actually in the air. Air molecules are vibrating in patterns. Your ears detect those vibrations. Your brain interprets the vibration patterns and constructs the sensation of sound, of melody, of music. The music exists in your brain, not in the vibrating air. And wetness follows the same pattern. Water isn't wet. Water creates conditions, evaporation, cooling, micro air currents that your senses detect. Your brain interprets those conditions and constructs the sensation of wetness. The wetness exists in your nervous system, not in the water. This changes everything about how you think about reality, the world you experience. The world of colors and sounds and textures and wetness, that world is largely a construction project happening inside your head. Your brain takes raw sensory data and builds a rich, detailed, seemingly objective reality. But that constructed reality is not the same as the physical reality it's based on. Physical reality is wavelengths of light, not colors. Pressure waves in air, not sounds. Molecular motion and phase changes, not wetness. Your experienced reality is a translation, an interpretation, a construction project your nervous system is constantly running. And here's the really disturbing part. You can't step outside your constructed reality to compare it with physical reality. Everything you know about physical reality comes through your senses, which means it comes through your brain's construction project. You're trapped inside your nervous system's interpretation of the world. This is why wetness seems so obvious, so fundamental, so much like a basic property of water. You've never experienced water without your brain's interpretation. You've never felt physical reality directly. Everything you've ever experienced has been filtered, processed, interpreted, and constructed by your nervous system. Think about what this means for everything you think you know. That chair you're sitting on, the hardness, the texture, the temperature, all of those are constructions your brain is making based on sensory data. The physical chair is atoms and electromagnetic forces. The experience chair is your brain's interpretation of those forces. The food you taste, the music you hear, the sunlight you feel on your skin, all constructions, all interpretations, all translations of physical phenomena into experienced sensations. You're not directly experiencing the physical world. You're experiencing your brain's translation of sensory data. And that translation is so seamless, so automatic, so convincing that you forget it's happening. You think you're experiencing the world as it is, but you're experiencing the world as your brain constructs it to be. Now, let's go back to that original question. Is water wet? The answer is no. Water is not wet. Wetness doesn't exist in water any more than redness exists in apples or music exists in air. Wetness is a sensation your brain constructs when water evaporates from your skin under specific conditions. Water can cause the conditions that lead to the sensation of wetness, but water itself is not wet. In fact, asking if water is wet is like asking if light is bright or if air is loud. These are category errors, confusing the physical phenomenon with the brain's constructed sensation. But here's the deeper realization. If wetness isn't a property of water, if it's a construction of your nervous system, then what else that seems fundamental and obvious is actually just your brain's interpretation? How much of your experienced reality is construction rather than detection? The answer is disturbing. Most of it. Maybe all of it. Let's explore this further because once you see how extensively your brain constructs reality, you can never see the world the same way again. Temperature. You think hot and cold are properties of objects, but they're not. Temperature is molecular motion. Fast-moving molecules feel hot. Slow-moving molecules feel cold. But hot and cold are interpretations your brain makes of molecular activity. The molecules aren't hot or cold, they're just moving at different speeds. Your temperature sensors detect the molecular motion and your brain constructs the sensations of hot and cold. This is why the same water can feel hot to one hand and cold to the other if you've conditioned them differently. The water hasn't changed. The molecular motion is identical, but your brain constructs different temperature sensations based on the relative difference from what each hand was previously experiencing. Smell works the same way. That rose doesn't actually smell like anything. The rose is releasing molecules into the air. Your nose detects those molecules. Your brain identifies the molecular pattern and constructs the sensation you call rose scent. The smell exists in your brain's interpretation, not in the molecules themselves. This is why you stop noticing smells after a while. Your brain stops updating the smell construction once it's identified the pattern. The molecules are still there, still hitting your nose, but your brain is no longer actively constructing the smell sensation. Taste follows the same pattern. Sweetness isn't in sugar. Sugar molecules fit into specific receptors on your tongue. Your brain interprets that receptor activation and constructs sweetness. The sugar molecules aren't sweet. They're just shaped in a way that triggers specific receptors that your brain interprets as sweetness. This is why artificial sweeteners work. They're not sugar molecules, but they're shaped similarly enough to trigger the same receptors, causing your brain to construct the same sweetness sensation even though the physical substance is completely different. Even more fundamentally, consider pain. You think pain is located in your body, your hand hurts, your head aches, your back is sore, but pain doesn't exist in those body parts. Pain is constructed entirely in your brain. Damage signals from your body parts travel to your brain, and your brain constructs the sensation of pain and projects it back to the location where the signals originated. This is why phantom limb pain is possible. People who have lost limbs can still feel pain in the missing limb. The limb is gone, but the brain circuits that construct pain sensations in that location are still active. The brain constructs pain and projects it to a location that no longer exists. This is also why pain can be influenced by attention, emotion, and expectation. The physical damage might be identical, but your brain's construction of pain can vary dramatically based on psychological factors. The pain you experience is not a direct readout of tissue damage. It's your brain's interpretation of damage signals modified by context, expectation, and emotional state. Your brain is not a passive receiver of information about the world. It's an active constructor of experienced reality, and that construction process is happening constantly, automatically, without your awareness or control. This constructive nature of experience explains so many puzzles about perception. Why do optical illusions work? Because your brain is constantly making assumptions and filling in gaps to construct a coherent visual experience. When those assumptions are wrong, you see something that doesn't match physical reality. Why can you not see your blind spot? Because your brain fills in the missing information, constructing visual experience for the area where you have no photoreceptors. You're not seeing nothing in your blind spot. Your brain is actively constructing something to put there based on the surrounding context. Why does a movie work? You're looking at still images flashed rapidly in sequence, but your brain constructs the experience of smooth motion. The motion doesn't exist in the images. It's created by your brain's interpretation of the sequence. Even more basically, why do you experience a unified visual field? Your eyes make tiny movements called saccades several times per second. Your vision is constantly jumping around, creating a chaotic, fragmented input, but your brain constructs a stable, unified visual experience by integrating information across time and filling in the gaps. You think you're seeing the world as it is. You're actually seeing your brain's real-time construction of what it thinks the world probably looks like based on incomplete, constantly changing visual information. And this construction process extends to your sense of self and your place in time. You feel like a continuous, unified self persisting through time. But that's also a construction. Your brain takes memories, current sensations, and predictions about the future and constructs the experience of being a continuous self. When you remember something, you feel like you're accessing stored information about past events. But memory isn't storage, it's reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds the memory from fragments. And that reconstruction can be influenced by current knowledge, emotions, and context. Your memories feel like accurate records of the past, but they're actually present moment constructions based on fragmentary information. Your sense of being located in the present moment is also constructed. Your brain takes sensory information that actually arrived at different times. Light travels faster than sound. Different sensory processing takes different amounts of time and constructs the experience of everything happening now simultaneously. Even your sense of free will, of being the author of your actions, is a construction. Brain imaging shows that the neural activity associated with a decision begins before you're consciously aware of making the decision. Your brain decides, then constructs the experience of deciding consciously. What you experience as free will is your brain's story about decisions that have already been made unconsciously. This is the deepest truth about human experience. Everything you think you know about reality, including yourself, is mediated by construction processes happening in your brain. You have never directly experienced the physical world. You have never directly experienced your own body. You have never directly experienced your own mind. Everything you call experience is your brain's real-time construction project, constantly building a simulation of reality from incomplete sensory data. That simulation is so sophisticated, so detailed, so consistent that you mistake it for reality itself. But it's not reality. It's your nervous system's best guess about what reality is probably like. The wetness you feel when you touch water, that's your brain constructing an interpretation of evaporation cooling. The pain you feel when you're injured, that's your brain constructing an interpretation of damage signals. Reality exists, but your access to it is always mediated, always interpreted, always constructed. You live inside your brain's simulation of reality, not in reality itself. And that simulation, convincing as it is always just a model, always incomplete, always shaped by the limitations and biases of the system that's constructing it. You can't step outside the construction to see reality directly, but you can become aware of the construction process. You can recognize that wetness, color, pain, self, memory, choice, all the basic categories of experience, are not features of reality, but features of how your brain models reality. That recognition changes everything. Not the experience itself. You'll still feel wet when you touch water, still see red when you look at apples, but your relationship to experience changes. You become aware of the gap between experience and reality, aware of the constructive nature of consciousness itself. Subscribe to Reimagine the Physics if you want to keep exploring the gap between experienced reality and physical reality. The deeper you go, the stranger it gets. And the stranger it gets, the more you realize how little you actually know about the world you think you live in. You can't unlearn this now. Every time you feel something wet, you'll remember that wetness is not out there in the world. It's in here, in your brain, constructed from incomplete information about what's happening to your skin. Reality is not what you experience. Reality is what your brain builds from the fragments your senses detect. And that's just the beginning of how strange the relationship between mind and world really is. But let's make this even more concrete. Here's another experiment. Take 2 bowls. Fill one with warm water, one with cold water. Put one hand in each bowl for 30 seconds. Now quickly move both hands to room temperature water. What do you feel? One hand feels cold, the other feels warm. Same water, 2 completely different sensations. Your brain is constructing different temperature sensations based on the relative difference from what each hand experienced previously. This is your brain's normal operating procedure. Temperature, like wetness, isn't a property you directly detect. It's a sensation your brain constructs based on changes relative to your current baseline. The same principle applies to every aspect of sensory experience. Your brain doesn't measure absolute values. It detects patterns, changes, relationships, and constructs sensations accordingly. This adaptive nature of sensory construction is crucial for survival. Your brain focuses on what's changing, what's different, what might be significant. It constructs sensations that highlight departures from normal, while filtering out unchanged conditions. This is why you don't feel your clothes or hear electrical hums. These are constant, so your brain doesn't construct ongoing sensations for them. But when something changes, your brain immediately constructs the appropriate sensation. Your sensory experience isn't a comprehensive survey of all physical conditions. It's a curated highlight reel of what your brain determines is worth your attention at any given moment. This selective construction is why two people can be in the same physical situation and have completely different experiences. They're not just interpreting the same data differently. Their brains are selecting different aspects of the available data to construct into conscious experience. Each brain is running its own construction process, building its own version of experienced reality from the same physical inputs. All you can do is recognize that your experience is a construction, that other people's experiences are also constructions, and that none of these constructions are identical to the physical reality they're based on. This recognition can be profoundly liberating. It frees you from the assumption that your experience is the only valid perspective on reality. The wetness you feel when you touch water is not an accurate representation of the molecular properties of H2O. But it's a useful construction that helps you navigate a world where the interaction between water and air has important implications. Reality is stranger than you experience it to be. But consciousness, the process that constructs your experience of reality, is stranger still.